Hello, and welcome to CampusGuard's webinar, The Digital Threat Landscape, What Security Leaders Need to Know. My name is Kathy Staples, and I'm the Marketing Manager at CampusGuard. We are recording today's session, so look for an email with a link to the recording on the next day or two. If you have any questions, please enter them into the chat, and we'll answer as many as we can following the presentation. We want your feedback about today's content, so please complete our brief survey after the session has ended. Today, we're exploring the latest trends in client-side attacks, digital supply chain threats, and web-based risks impacting organizations today. Let's get started by introducing today's presenter. Matt McGurk is the Senior Director and Global Head of Field Engineering for Source Defense. Matt is an expert in JavaScript, web technology, client-side risk, and client-side security. He has over 15 years of experience in web application development, web app security, and website administration. He served as a consultant and analyst at Fortune 50 companies on how best to secure their customer-facing web properties and business-critical web applications. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Matt.
Thank you, Kathy. I appreciate it. It's great to speak with everybody today. As was mentioned, my name is Matt McGurk. I've been here at Source Defense for quite a while. We've been partnered with CampusGuard, and I've been working closely with them for about 3.5 or 4 years. And also, I started my career in higher education on the administrative side of things. So about 10 years at New York University and Yale University. So I kind of know your guys' part of the world and some of the cultural stuff and some of the challenges you face. So it's always a pleasure to be able to speak to a higher education audience. As was mentioned, we're going to be talking about digital skimming, what that is, what some of the current, let's call them, trends are in this space, and what you should know to make sure your institutions are secure and compliant with these areas. So I think we covered introductions pretty well. As far as the agenda goes, there's going to be a little bit of introduction about Source Defense and how we work with CampusGuard. I'm going to review the problem statement so that everything's clear there. There's no kind of ambiguity about the topic in general. And then there's going to be a little bit of discussion about what the most recent kinds of attacks have looked like and what you might need to know about them, as well as how CampusGuard and Source Defense can work to help you with those problems. Source Defense, like I mentioned, we've been in this space for a very long time. We are partnered with MasterCard. We're part of what's called their Start Path program to help solve eSkimming and digital skimming problems. So we're very deeply integrated, let's say, into this problem space and into this part of web application security. We view our mission really as protecting data at the point of capture, the point of input. So web applications are obviously a huge part of every modern, enterprise. Any kind of endeavor in the world really has some kind of web presence at this point. We spent, when we say we, like the cybersecurity and compliance professions have spent like 50 years or so making sure that our servers and our databases and our networks are secure, but we never really thought about web pages and the places where people actually type information and enter them into those websites as its own unique security problem to solve. And so that's what Source Defense was founded to do, was to treat the front end or client side of web applications as full-fledged citizens and parts of the conversation and parts of the problem to solve. We are really about privacy, compliance, and security, kind of like I underlined. This digital skimming problem is a mandate under DSS, under the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, but it is also a general problem that should be solved because it can lead to security problems really anywhere that there is a web presence, and also just in a straight up privacy sense. So like, what are your partners doing, and your marketing or vendors or et cetera partners doing? How are they interacting with your visitors, and how are they interacting with your other stakeholders? Obviously, there are PCI implications for this, but also GDPR, if any of you have international students or any kind of exposure to European privacy law, which is like just the whole globe now because of how those rules are written, really. If any of your institutions include healthcare or otherwise kind of patient and health focused stuff, there is 1000% applicability under HIPAA, and the general security rule and the OCR guidance calls out client-side security in specific for those. And then there's also been some interest in the banking space and et cetera. So as we do talk really extensively about PCI here at Source Defense and here at CampusGuard as just kind of the flagship issue these days. But I would urge you to consider this problem, again, anywhere that there's a website, anywhere that people enter information into it, and anywhere that that's covered by these different interlocking regulations is something you should think about. Again, a little bit more kind of about why source defense exists. There is a fundamental problem, like I said a couple times, with how web pages are engineered. Most organizations really freely give out access to their web pages to partners, analytics platforms, chat widgets, all this kind of stuff gets integrated into a web page. And that's really extending a whole bunch of trust and a whole bunch of security exposure to those vendors. And source defense, the approach that we use with our products with ScriptSafe is to make sure that the code running inside a web page is controlled, that there's security controls around it, that it has least privileged access to different kinds of data and to its capabilities, meaning that your marketing tool shouldn't be able to collect sensitive student information unless it's supposed to. And your customer support chat tool shouldn't be able to inject malicious ads into your student support pages, donor engagement pages, unless well, it'll never need access for malicious ads, but unless it has a legitimate purpose to modify those web pages, those are the kind of things that source defense's technology is meant to prevent and to secure. And to mention one more time, we do have an active relationship with MasterCard. We're also a primary participating organization with the PCI Council. We sit on their small business and e-commerce task force for this stuff. The only point I'm trying to drive home here is that we are really deeply invested and integrated across this whole ecosystem. I guess what I'm trying to say here is we do sort of know what we're talking about, or I should anyway, or it'll be really embarrassing for me. So let's move forward. What are digital skimming attacks and why are they important? Digital skimming attacks, like I said, are basically the capability for the code inside of a web page to take information it's not supposed to. That can be in the case of just a misconfiguration, in which case you have kind of a general data privacy problem, or in the case of an actual cybersecurity attack, when attackers will use this capability to steal information. The root cause of this, and by the way, I don't intend this presentation to be overly technical. If there are any technical folks here, welcome. But I'm going to try to give everybody just the kind of brass tacks of what the concepts, let's say, that you need to understand this topic in full. But don't stress, we're not going to be doing like a bunch of code review or something as part of this. JavaScript, though, is the programming language inside of a web page. So when we visit a web page, all the guts underneath that makes that web page interactive, that is JavaScript. The fundamental problem with JavaScript is that it has no security controls whatsoever by default natively. It just doesn't have any ways for the web page to say this information is private or this information is sensitive or this tool should not be able to change the web page or etc. This has been a problem for 30 years since the language was specified. And I guess basically the idea here was nobody thought through that the cute little programming language we were throwing together to make like calculators and stuff was going to, in 30 years, be a backbone of all commerce and business like in the world. Nobody really thought that through. And so as a result, we've got this mess where attackers use this language to do a bunch of nefarious things. In terms of terminology, you may have heard the term mage cart if you're very plugged into this space. That's kind of the old school, at this point, hacker brand name for a client-side attack. And by the way, client-side, let's just do a little more definition work. Digital skimming and eSkimming are basically the same thing. They are types of client-side security problems. This means the web browser and specifically the web page. That's what the client is. So these attacks, you might hear mage cart, you might hear eSkimming, digital skimming, form jacking, credential harvesting. All this is the same stuff. These are problems that occur with code inside of web pages. Real world risks, meaning like, okay, cool, there's a fundamental problem, there's a security vulnerability, so to speak. What does this add up to if your institution unfortunately falls victim to it? Reputational damage. Well, let's see, let me zoom into one particular part. I mean, I would say the student and donor harm is probably your most significant part here, meaning that this can lead to the students, let's just call them constituents, to your constituents' information being stolen, and therefore needing to remediate that, set up a call center, all that stuff. So it's really, this is the heart of it, is that someone's information is going to leave your sites and be used for negative purposes. Reputational damage then is kind of not unique, but is of particular uh, interest in higher ed, I would say, meaning that an attacker can change what your web pages look like and then use that change to, promote a political idea or just, deface the brand. Branding is a huge part of every higher ed institution for a whole bunch of reasons. Being able to change what a website looks like and the attacker presenting their own message is a big deal. The other items here are certainly important, but regulatory and legal exposure, as well as PCI non-compliance. I think this audience, if you guys are compliance folks in here as well, pretty obvious, which is you, of course, need to make sure that your attestations and your reports on compliance and all the other good stuff is up to snuff. If you're found to be out in the rain on making sure that you're compliant with PCI DSS 643 and 1161, which are the eSkimming requirements. We'll talk about those more. If you don't have that in place, then your assessments may not be successful and so on and so forth. So the way that this stuff happens, I'm going to talk a little bit about the mechanics because I think it's interesting and useful to know. The way a digital skimming attack happens is like this. No, it's like this. So we have a web browser here. That's what this icon represents in the middle of my screen. The web browser talks to a web server. So when I type in university.edu and hit enter, this next thing happens. So the web browser is going to send content back into the the web server is going to send content back into the web browser. And that is going to kind of start to turn into the web page. The web page is going to load a bunch of code, some of it from the web server, some of it from what we call third-party sources. So literally the web page will on the fly request code from, say, Google, say, Facebook, Freshdesk, AI integrations to support chatbots, social media, so folks can share stuff. Basically, the web page says, hey, all of these different companies and servers, give me your code, and I'm going to run it. And the problem, like I mentioned with JavaScript, is when that code runs, there is no security around it. It's not monitored in any way. There's nobody paying attention once we're out in the web browser, just kind of doing stuff. And so all this code gets the same permission. Attackers know about this, and what they will do is sneak code into the web page through these kind of channels, meaning that the attacker, hacks into a server that belongs to one of these third parties, one of your vendors or one of the vendors. That's the idea. They may also hack into your own server in a slightly different flavor of attack. That certainly happens as well. But the attacker will get into these supply chains, and then they will end up in the web page. And then when they're running in the web page, they will steal information. So they will kind of silently hang out. And as the visitor is interacting with the web page, they will listen to that visitor's keystrokes, or they will, record their form submissions or change the web page so that it looks different and behaves differently. And so the attacker then makes use of this capability that the web browser just hands out like candy, and then uses it to usually steal data because that is the most effective way for them to make money. I want to show a little bit of a practical example of this as well, because I think it's useful to put a visual to the narrative. So give me just one moment as I grab a screen here, and I'm going to show you an example simulation, by the way, of what a digital skimming attack looks like. So here you go. You are seeing my screen looks like to me. And this is, like I said, this is the New York Times website. No particular reason, just it's a public website and folks are sort of sometimes familiar with it. So what I'll do here, I want to do a couple things. First, I want to show you just what is going on under the hood, so to speak, in this particular web page. So what I've done is open up the development tools in Google Chrome. This is just a normal part of the web browser. It's a little technical, but it's nothing nefarious is happening yet. And what I'm showing you is all the different JavaScript files that have been loaded into my web browser because I visited this web page. So there are 320 of these or so different JavaScript files. And like I mentioned, each and every single one of these is code. It is a dynamic, interactive thing that's now running behind the scenes here. And all of it has the same level of access to the web page and what it looks like and how it performs and et cetera. And so this is the heart of the problem. If I'm the New York Times, I have to make sure that I have a way to secure all of this code, to monitor all of it, to make sure it's not doing what I don't expect it to do, so on and so forth. And you'll notice that, yes, a lot of this code, you can see here, this domain in the middle, a huge amount of this stuff is getting served from the Times themselves. So they've written it or they've integrated it. This is kind of like their problem. And they probably have good development processes to make sure the code is secure and lots of other stuff. But they do have dozens, just at a glance, of other JavaScript integrations in here that are coming from other parts of the internet. So this is just kind of a quirk of how web pages work, is they're all highly interdependent on other parts of the internet. So this is a bunch of code that's coming from places like the Amazon ad system, places like Google syndication and GeoEdge, so on and so forth. Every single one of these servers then is now kind of part of the New York Times, let's call it security landscape. They should care about, are any of these servers serving malicious code? Are any of them doing stuff they're not supposed to be doing? So I'm just trying to give you an idea of the complexity of the problem, trying to solve for this stuff of how do I keep on track of all of my vendors' code. And because it's not just like this is going to happen once and I can look at all of it and know what's going on, all this stuff changes all the time. Like sometimes it changes at the time you request the web page because they bake in some kind of user token or do some kind of other specialization. Or you can see it actually happen here, serves a different ad, right? So that's different content, so on and so forth. So what I want to do here is show you an example of what happens if some of that code is compromised. So what I'm going to do here is go over here and start to log into my New York Times account. I'm going to split my screen because what just happened was my demonstration eSkimming attack has kind of sprung into action. My demo thing spits out this black and green terminal window. In reality, of course, these attacks are silent. They don't have this kind of illustration, but I want us to have something to see rather than just nothing happening. So what I'm going to do here is begin to log into my account here in the, let's call it visitor view on the left. And over here in the attack view, you can see that the malicious code has no problem grabbing my keystrokes as I log in. When I click continue, you're going to see a little more advanced part of the attack spring into action, which is that this form appears. And this form is not a part of the New York Times experience, so to speak. You will never see this on the New York Times website when it's running legitimately. This is something that the attack has injected. The attacker literally generated a form that looks like, and this is absolutely trivial to do now with AI. They've generated a form to look exactly like the New York Times. And then for the visitor, what they're basically doing is social engineering. They're saying to the visitor, hey, enter this information that you're used to entering into everything all the time. And then the attacker gets my credit card number or whatever else they want to ask for without having to wait for me to make a purchase or to update my account or to make a donation or to access a student record. The attacker can simply ask for what they want and then get the information. So for any of you who are in compliance and who have been thinking about this kind of web page card stuff for a while, this kind of attack, just to drill way in, this kind of attack is why this is now a problem under PCI DSS 401. So in the past, you could have used the payment service provider, you could have embedded their payment form, that would have put you pretty far out of scope. This kind of form replacement and fraud that I'm doing here, well, I'm simulating here, I'm not actually doing any fraud. The thing I'm showing you here is why that iframe payment service provider embedding approach is no longer sufficient on its own. Because the attacker can simply replace the legitimate payment form with their own form and then do whatever they want. So that's the idea. If anyone's curious, like, why do I have to start doing this now? Under 3.2, I didn't have to do anything. It's because of this kind of attack where the web page is interactively modified to steal information. I'm going to click proceed to my account here. You can see here that at that point, the attack is going to send that collected information to another part of the internet. Now, at this point in a real attack, they would probably just let me log in and continue, or they would complete my purchase. The attack would complete my purchase. Basically, nothing. The visitor would just continue on with their day. My attack demonstration throws us off to a contact the get help page because I don't actually want to do anything real to the Times website during my demos. But the point I'm trying to illustrate is that in reality, I would probably just get logged into my account. I, as a visitor, would have no idea there was any kind of problem. And then later, maybe I get a breach notification when my credit card number shows up on the dark web. From the New York Times perspective, like from their security team or compliance team, none of this, like, there's no log of this anywhere. There's no like firewall log or something saying, hey, there was a breach or something went wrong or so on and so forth. Because it all happened out in browser land. This is just something that happened, in this case, in New Haven, Connecticut, on my desktop computer. It's not like something that happened on their servers. And so that's one of the reasons why these attacks can be so persistent and that they can be so difficult to remediate. Like oftentimes you can find examples of attacks that have been running for like 4, 5, 6 years before they're detected and remediated. So that's one of the reasons why. So that is a visual illustration of an attack. I find that can be useful to um, sew together some of the more conceptual parts of this. And so I hope that was useful. We're going to keep going here. And we're going to talk a little bit about like how to solve this, et cetera. Well, actually, since I touched on it, let me delve specifically into the DSS requirements, just because I think it's a natural-ish place to talk about them. DSS 4.0.1 now mandates that in-scope organizations have digital skimming protection in place. That merchants or service providers have to do a handful of things. They must inventory any JavaScript on their payment pages, and a payment page would include a web page into which one of those iframes is embedded. So your PSP's iframe, it gets embedded into a web page. That web page turns into a payment page in effect for DSS compliance purposes. You must have a written justification for scripts to be there, meaning somebody's got to sign off on that being in a payment page and why. You have to implement a mechanism to verify the integrity of payment page scripts. And you also have to implement a mechanism to verify what are called the HTTP response headers. That's really just the metadata that gets served along with the web page. We as visitors don't see it, but it contains security settings. And so it's important to monitor those as well. These are requirements 6.4.3 and 11.6.1 in DSS. I've just kind of combined them into the actual things that one must do. So as you consider kind of the importance of this topic to your institution, like solving it for the security case or for the compliance case, this is the specific brass tacks reasons why I would assume, frankly, some of you are looking at this. Maybe why some of you are starting to think about digital skimming is because of solving these particular rules. And so what I want to do now is take just a second and check in with the audience. We're going to run a quick poll. And I want to ask a few questions to you about your institution and what you're doing about digital skimming now. So just a few questions that should give us a gauge as we move forward into the other topics we're going to talk about today. I'm seeing a few responses come in. And by the way, if you have questions, if anyone has questions or comments, we'll have time at the end, of course, for Q&A. But feel free to type it into the Q&A live, and I'll do my best to address it as we go. Don't mind that at all. So thank you for your participation. And Kathy, I kind of don't know like how to close out the poll, so I'm gonna have to rely on you to let me know when that happens and all that good stuff. Let me see if I can find the results in here. Very good. So let's see. Just I'll run through these so if anyone's curious about the results. In fact, can I share this? I probably can't because Zoom will hide it. I'll just read it out to you though. How confident are you that your organization knows about your scripts? About half of you said that you're just not sure. And I think that you shouldn't, there's no shame in that, especially in higher ed. You probably are dealing with just like a real diverse set of merchants that are both, like internal and external, or running different kind of PSP solutions and everything else. That's very, very common. Have you reviewed what data your third-party scripts have access? A couple of you are doing this continuously, and I'm glad to hear that. That is a very mature approach. And as we see this thing get more attention and DSS getting more. Anyway, you get my point. Yep, that is happening. Again, about 50% with not sure, or 70% if we add the no's in there. Like I said, also very common. It's a good practice. So the reason I kind of asked this question is that it can be useful. It will be useful both from a solving for 643 and 1161 standpoint, as well as just a general like knowing the health of your websites kind of thing. So what I mean by that is a lot of the clients I work with, higher ed or otherwise, use the kind like take an inventory basically of okay, we have these marketing tools, they're interacting with this kind of student data, and therefore we can talk to general counsel about like how risky is this? Are we cool with the risk analysis, that kind of thing. So how prepared are you meaning for a DSS? This is interesting to me because it's a pretty even distribution across the topics, across the responses. Like, yeah, it's almost a plurality, like an even plurality. So it's like some prepared, still assessing, haven't started. This is interesting to me because, like I said, I've been talking about this for a really long time. A year ago or 18 months ago, I would have expected this to be like way heavily skewed towards we haven't started or we don't know. This is what I would expect from like the world, whereas everyone's kind of in the middle of getting there, of getting or improving where they are, or kind of like revisiting the solutions they came up with. So, like I said, this crowd, you folks here today, are pretty evenly split across your assessments and your compliance stuff and figuring out what you've got going. So I appreciate that feedback. It's going to help me dial in some of the stuff I'm going to talk about here in a second. And so I appreciate your consideration. I have an interesting question that came through, and I appreciate that live, which is that Anonymous asks, why is JavaScript still being used if it's inherently insecure? Is there no replacement coding language that could be used instead? Cool question. And the answer is why it is literally like 98% of the internet or something like that, of the World Wide Web, I should say. 98% of the World Wide Web uses JavaScript to make their web pages interactive. And it really is the only language that a web browser can run to do that interactivity. There are emerging technologies, something called WebAssembly, has been kind of like, people have been trying to get WebAssembly to work it works. Point being, there's just so much inertia and there's so much momentum and there's so much adoption and every single web browser supports it. And like your refrigerator probably, I'm serious, your refrigerator probably runs JavaScript, that it's never going to kind of go away. That's just the thing. I guess to sum up the answer succinctly, which is hard for me, you might be able to tell, it's momentum. It's everywhere. It's common. There's been billions of dollars put into making it so common. It's not going away. How do you determine scope of which websites to monitor? Is it every web payment page or so? Okay, so from a general security standpoint, it is a good. So again, not compliance specific, but from a general security standpoint, it is a good idea to monitor basically every single one of your websites for this kind of digital skimming stuff. If you want to be a little narrower about it, it would be places that are interactive in some way. So like if you have a student information system where people can log in, if you have a healthcare system where people can like find a doctor, there are different reasons on each of those to secure them. In terms of DSS 643 and 1161, and by the way, your folks, if you have a contact at CampusGuard, they'll be more than happy to talk about specifics of your scope. But the scope, the question, how do you determine scope of which websites to monitor? The easiest way to start is that if you have if anywhere on your websites, there is a form into which someone can type a credit card, you probably have scope for 643 and 1161 on those web pages. The cases where you wouldn't have any scope at all, let's say that let's say a student group has set up a Shopify account. And they are just selling stuff on there. There is probably every chance in the world that Shopify owns all it's just a whole vendor platform. You don't have to care about it. On the other hand, if you've got payment service providers that are integrated into your web pages, if you own an instance of a donor management system or something, you probably have scope for it. So the shortest answer I can give you on this call is what's in scope. If there's a web page and you can type a card number into it, you at least need to, let's say, make sure it's not in scope. That's where you start with the audit, and then CampusGuard can certainly help you drill more specifically into that. Let's see. Let's keep going. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about what's happening kind of in this space, some innovations in it. I will preface this by saying that this information comes from our research group. They do an excellent job. Basically, we have some full-time people who just pay attention to mage card and client-side skimming attacks and figure out new cool stuff about them and publish a lot of research about it. What I want to give you in the next few slides is just a couple kind of greatest hits of how complex and how weird this space has gotten and how much attention is getting poured into it by attackers. So it's a rapidly evolving and complicated field. And this is really just to give you kind of a taste of why we can't just kind of check the box and move on with it. So this is, and by the way, this is all from either Q2 or Q1, so the last 6 months of 2026. What I want to point out here is that most attacks these days take advantage of Google in one way or the other. So Google is almost certainly in your web pages in one way or the other. Attackers know that, and so they take advantage of tools like the Google Tag Manager or other similar tools like Google Analytics, and they will then use that to basically steal card numbers. Like I said before, the preface, I have a lot more detail on this. I'm going to leave it as a follow-up, but what I want you to understand about this is that attackers are doing a much better job of using what they find inside web pages, of exploiting it, and then hitting targets like gigantic auto brands and et cetera. So if you're one of that group that we saw before in the poll, who already has a solution in place or is pretty confident in the inventory, these are some of the things you might want to like kind of pressure test those solutions with. How's it doing with GTM? How's it doing with Google Analytics? Similar things like that. Using trusted APIs to get data out of the browser. So for anyone who's using something like a content security policy or some other kind of whitelisting approach, we're seeing a lot of getting data out of your web pages by using a trusted part of the internet to drop it to. Like you can see from this, it's pretty complex, frankly. But the idea, much like the Google example with auto brands before, is just taking advantage of what they find in the web pages and exploiting legitimate services to get data out. Meaning that if your web page has to interact with a PSP like Braintree or a server like Google or something like that, then the web browser has to be able to talk to those places, and the attacker can just use their own Braintree account, so to speak, to have the web page send data to the attacker rather than to the legitimate place. So this is another example of the kind of metastasization of mage card attacks. If you're using content security policy, CSP is a pretty common approach to solving for this. You may want to consider something called WebRTC as a new wrinkle in this whole thing. Unfortunately, WebRTC is another way of sending data out of a web browser, not just the hypertext transfer protocol, but a kind of a thing that's normally used for video or audio. And so attackers know that content security policy might be in place, and so they just open a WebRTC connection. So just to kind of hitting on some topics for any more advanced practitioners in the audience, you want to look at WebRTC and you want to look at how your CSP is configured and whether or not, well, I mean, frankly, yeah, you can't cover WebRTC with content security policy, so you'd want to look at that. And then this one is applicable to basically everybody and is something we're going to see way more of and have seen more of over the last 10 years, is this idea of an attacker getting to any part of the website and not just relying on kind of the checkout page as the only place where they can do damage or get their attack to be successful. We are seeing more and more attacks that take place outside of the checkout page, just kind of like that New York Times demo I showed you guys. The attacker can simply ask for the information they want on other parts of the site. Like in this case, and again, pretty technical, but error 400 page, basically an error page that a normal legit website would present. The attacker makes use of, but kind of forces the web browser to go there. and then uses that error page to deliver a malicious form. So that's why we feel it's important to get the entire website in scope rather than just the checkout page, however that's defined for you. But that's a balance between security and compliance that you want to think about as you do it. So I'm going to follow up with a link that has tons of additional information about each of these, as well as all of our other research that we've done over the last year. But that's just it's just a little taster of some of the more advanced things that we've seen out in the space. Now, what I want to talk about is what CampusGuard and Source Defense do together to help make this space more secure. And the thing that we want to talk to you about is ScriptSafe. So ScriptSafe is it's a solution. It is not simply an audit tool or an assessment tool. It is a solution that stops digital skimming attacks and makes your site secure. And as a result of that, makes you compliant. So this is a way to solve the problem, not just a way to know more about how much of a problem you have, so to speak. It does this it's powered by Source Defense. It's powered by our core technology that we've been in market with for about 10 years. And the basic idea here is to isolate that code we've been talking about for a while, isolate this code from the web page on the fly. This is all happening invisibly inside of the web page. There's no anything to install for the visitor or anything else like that. Isolate those scripts, block harmful behaviors. So stop the actual behaviors from damaging the visitor. What I mean by that is stop the skimming, stop the malicious changes, stop data leakage without interfering with the business function of these tools. So Source Defense and ScriptSafe will allow an analytics tool to collect the information it needs, but we would block it if it attempts to access sensitive information. And just that behavior, just that access to sensitive information, not the analytics tool overall. And I think probably the most important part of this is it actually stops attacks in real time. So as the visitor is interacting with your site or your brand, it will actually stop malicious code from damaging the visitor. A little more technically, the way that this works is that we have the same relationship between browser and server that we talked about before. Along with the normal web page code, the web page also has ScriptSafe installed inside of it. So inside of the web page, invisibly, the Source Defense ScriptSafe code is running, and it's implementing those security functions we talked about. Things like setting up sandboxes. That's what these little browser icons are. Sandboxes to execute outside code. We're also hooking into the way the web page works in a bunch of different ways and monitoring it and sometimes changing that behavior to make it more secure. And then as a result, we can block malicious behavior from happening and from damaging the visitor. So like that example I gave you before, let's say that in this case, an advertising tool, let's say it needs to set a cookie, just a little kind of bookmark in the visitor's browser. It needs to do that, and that's legitimate. If that's the case, then Source Defense will permit that behavior. That cookie setting will be allowed. But if that advertising tool starts to try to inject a malicious form into the web page, Source Defense ScriptSafe will block that, and it will be unable to harm the visitor. So we allow the good behavior, we block the bad behavior. And we do that also by providing interfaces like this one. Let me just grab my screen here. Interfaces like this one that make it easy to prove how ScriptSafe is making you compliant with PCI DSS 643 and 1161. In addition to all the other benefit we talked about, but in specific, the idea being that using ScriptSafe will make your site secure, will make them not susceptible to digital skimming attacks. And we also give you the tools to prove how you're doing that in terms of evidence. So here you're seeing a PCI DSS dashboard in Source Defense. I can export all the reporting I might want about my DSS compliance so that when my SAQs come up, I can do that. I can also manage multiple different sites in this if I want to. So if you have a bunch of merchants across the institution, you can manage all of their compliance reporting in one place. There's also a huge amount of security functionality in here. So the ability to automatically inventory all of your payment page scripts and visualize them, like I'm showing you here on the screen. The ability to see the behavior of those scripts in real time. So over here, I can see what scripts are interacting with personally identifiable information or setting cookies or loading malicious code. I can see any of that at a glance. If you recall from a few minutes ago, that idea of I want to be able to, maybe at my institution, I want to be able to provide to decision makers, here's the risk on our websites. Do you want to allow this risk? This would be a real easy way to do that. We, of course, have events and alerting to let you know if something bad is happening on your website so you can take action on it. And we also have really practical workflows through here to help you with those compliance tasks. So if you remember those four things I mentioned, inventory, authorize, justify, monitor, security headers, that's what these workflows do. Whereas here I can see I've got a few scripts on my merchant sites that I need to justify. I can click here to manage them. I can click through the script, have Source Defense automatically generate that justification for me, authorize and justify it. And while I'm here, I can see a ton more information. What kind of PII is this script interacting with? Where is it sending data? Is it accessing card data? It looks like it was in the past, but it no longer is. So this is the kind of context that I can use while I'm writing down my justification. And then I can, then I know that the script is in compliance with DSS. The other thing I wanted to point out while we're on this screen is that active kind of security that Source Defense can do, where we will actually prevent sensitive access to sensitive information. If it's unnecessary, we'll prevent a script from maliciously modifying a web page, and we do this automatically and without any you guys don't have to do anything if you don't want to. We can apply these rules automatically. We provide these rules to our customers as part of the service. So it can be a really fire and forget solution. Really just kind of takes care of it. You add a couple lines of code to your web pages, and then the rest of it is compliant and secure. And that's the basic idea. So this is what ScriptSafe can do. It sockets into that part of the compliance and security landscape to just really solve the digital skimming problem. That's the goal of it. So let me go back over here and I'll share my different part of my screen again. I see I got a couple questions that have filtered in, so I'll be happy to answer those as well. I see. That's a great question. So the question is, I'm confused, which is valid. Sorry about that. I'm confused. I thought that the Magecart eSkimming attacks happened in the client's browser and not seen by the website provider, but it sounds like your product is running on the web server. So that's, let me clarify that. Where Source Defense runs is within the web page itself at runtime. We're kind of like a marketing tool or kind of like a customer support chat tool, but our purpose is security. So this is a web page where Source Defense is installed, headphonescity.com if you want to visit it yourself. Our deployment looks like this. So this is what Source Defense looks like in practice. What you're seeing on your screen are a few lines of HTML. This is the guts of the web page. To describe the deployment with like basically zero technicals, what my team does is give our customers these lines of text in a text file. They're then copied and pasted into the web page, and then the web browser runs the Source Defense code during every page view and every session and every interaction. So Source Defense is always there as the visitor is going through their experience and doing their purchase or donation or et cetera. So that's a great clarification. We're not running on the web server, in fact, at all. There's nothing that you need to do to be there's nothing you need to change or install on your servers or infrastructure or network for Source Defense to work. These text lines simply need to appear in your web pages. Then we run inside of the web page, and then we do all the work both to collect the information and to harden the web page itself. So thank you very much for asking that question. It's an important clarification. I also see a question that kind of hung out from a little while ago, which I'm happy to answer now. Any insight on PayPal buttons? I need to dig into it a little bit more by like what we mean by a PayPal button in this case. But if you literally have like a link on your site, like it says like click here to go to PayPal, and there's no kind of like business logic to it or other, it's not like you're embedding a whole thing from PayPal. That's a bunch of mechanical payment stuff. If it's literally just like a link to PayPal, I don't think you have any scope there. I'll defer to your CampusGuard folks, of course, or your QSA or ISA, but links aren't in scope. The things that are in scope are you're embedding a payment form from PayPal into your web page, or you've got a what's called a script-based redirect, where your web pages automatically send someone to a PayPal page without them doing anything. That would be the second case where you're in scope. But to answer the question most simply, if you just straight up have a button that says go to PayPal, you don't have scope there, in my opinion. Anyway, so I'll answer that one live. I want to talk about as we get to our conclusion here, and if anyone has more questions, feel free to throw them in the Q&A box there. But as we come to our conclusion, let me share a couple thoughts, which is how CampusGuard and Source Defense can help you out here. So, I mean, a couple more notes on the partnership. Like I said, we've been working together at CampusGuard and Source Defense for nearly 3 years, maybe more than that now. Our teams are very familiar with this. Isn't simply like a referral relationship where you get punted over to a vendor and you got to deal with it. The CampusGuard folks know the ScriptSafe solution and Source Defense very, very well. They can do their own support. The QSAs at CampusGuard are familiar with it in terms of an evidence kind of review standpoint. They know what it is. They know how to work with it. So I just want to give you the idea that it's not. It's a deep and important partnership to both sets, both companies, and we're really glad to be able to work together. Evaluations, Source Defense is super happy to support those, of course. We can get you a testing environment. We can often even scan your sites and do everything externally without you deploying anything. So if you're curious about how would ScriptSafe work for my institution, and what would it look like and really how would it work, we can do that in like a week. And that's just the bulk of that is scheduling meetings, like getting time where everyone can meet together. The actual work is for you zero, and for us a couple hours, so no big deal. Support during your process. So we know Source Defense knows a lot about how this problem needs to be solved in higher ed, and the challenges you might face. Like I said, I have personally, or I guess professionally, but I mean, I individually have a lot of experience in the higher ed environment. So we are happy to help you figure out the best way to do this. And it can be deployed incredibly rapidly, meaning that if you decide to use ScriptSafe, it can be extremely self-service. We'll support you however you need, but my point is that if you kind of want to say, I want to get up and running with the solution, get out of my way so my teams can use it, you can do that. I mean, we can get accounts and everything you need spun up in 24 hours or less, sincerely. So I'm going to pause here. I guess I'll pause here. Any other questions from the audience? Anything else that we want to talk about? Let's see here. Are you able to monitor environments where the tag cannot be installed or enforce controls within third-party hosted iframes? So good question. We cannot enforce controls within third-party hosted iframes, but you shouldn't, in my opinion, need to do that from your perspective. So I'm making an assumption here, which is that you are concerned with payment service providers, payment form. You want to make sure the web page inside that iframe is secure or something. You as the merchant in this case, let me put it that way, don't need to make sure that the PSP's iframe is compliant, like the guts of it. You don't need to monitor it. They need to tell you that they're doing 643 and 1161, and they need to prove it in their AOCs and et cetera, but you don't need to actually monitor it. So we don't do that for our, let's call them merchant customers, because it's not part of their scope and they don't want us to. Source Defense, on the other hand, has a lot of relationships with PSPs where we are doing that work for them, and we are helping them satisfy 643 and 1161. But it shouldn't be something that you need to monitor from your perspective. As I think you get what I'm saying. And then the second question, are you able to monitor environments where the tag cannot be installed? Yes. Source Defense can also be used externally, meaning we will scan an environment from outside without needing to be deployed. There are considerations with that approach. Frankly, it may not sound like it, but it's usually a lot easier to deploy our code and then have that just be there and collect the data and everything else, rather than scanning a site externally, mainly for operational reasons. Like, we can do it, don't get me wrong, but you guys would need to tell us, like, hey, we have a new payment page that needs to be scanned, et cetera, and yada, yada. So yes, in cases where that's appropriate, we can certainly do that as well.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Matt, we have a couple other questions. If attacks are happening outside of the iframe, why doesn't the PCI standard reflect that as a concern? Why is the focus narrowed just to payment pages?
So yeah, it's the part of it's like the confusion around the terminology. So the standard, the DSS says that defines the term payment page a little weird. They say that the payment page is kind of the payment page is the contents of the iframe, but the page into which the iframe is embedded also has to be secure for 643 and 1161. And so what happens just in common language is we call everything a payment page, meaning you do have to make sure that the page into which the iframe is embedded is secure as well. DSS is kind of shifting, in my opinion. I mean, I don't have like insider knowledge or anything, but I think it's becoming more obvious that these attacks take place everywhere on a website and not simply on the payment page. So I expect the scope will increase a little bit more, but it's a combination of kind of like I think the idea, if I can, I don't know, try to read the council's mind a little bit, was that they needed to stop the bleeding. And so this is a huge problem. It's a real problem. It's been going on for a long time, and they need to address it. But they need to do something practical. So they're going to say payment page. They're going to say this form. They're going to say that sort of thing, and make it somewhat minimal in the scope. But in doing that, the words got a little bit weird, and also it kind of ignored a lot of the security problems. So I think I kind of just started rambling here. But what I mean is that it's an evolving space. There's going to be more scrutiny on the entire site, and the definition of payment page is clear once you it's clear as mud. Once you like look at it, it's broader than just the iframe and the embed itself.
Absolutely. Are you seeing larger platforms start to embed security as a feature in their payment products?
Yes and no. I mean, something that's been a little bit disheartening is I see payment service providers kind of telling their merchants that the merchant is compliant because they use the PSP. Like the language in DSS and in the SAQs is that everybody, at the very least, needs to make sure that their websites are not susceptible to digital skimming attacks. And some PSPs are kind of just saying, that's fine, we're making you not susceptible somehow, when that's not actually that's not true. They're not actually doing that in any way. And QSAs and QSAs are starting to see that and kind of call BS on that, to use a word for it. So I would be one, no. I mean, in some cases, yes, we do see like very large platform providers owning more of the compliance picture, but in reality, what we're seeing is a false comfort or something, thinking that PSPs have solved this problem for their merchants when they haven't. So I would, I'm a little cynical on that topic, but I'd urge everyone to put some scrutiny on their PSP and how much they're actually helping before an attack or a PFI or something else.
Okay. And what's the next big shift in PCI compliance or fraud prevention that we should be preparing for?
Yeah, I think, like I mentioned, consider the entire website because attacks do take place anywhere on the website, not just on payment pages. And then there's always some rumblings about getting away from PANs, from primary account numbers altogether, the retirement of a 16-digit card number and that kind of stuff. That doesn't mean that the e-skimming problem goes away, because if you think about it, even if it's numberless or it's CVEP or it's P2P encrypted or whatever, the payment action still happens inside of a web page where there's a web page. It doesn't kind of matter how I click that button or how it decided I was the account holder or whatever. It's still a web page thing where the fraud can happen and where the exploitation can happen. So although the goal in the long run, I think, is like to have us all be using, encrypted tokens to transfer stuff, so long as a human's still interacting with a web page, the digital skimming part of it is still going to be a huge problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's all the questions that we have. If you have any additional questions for Matt, feel free to reach out to us on campusguard.com/contact-us. We'd be happy to follow up with you with any questions you may have. Thanks, Matt, for your insightful presentation, of course, and to all of our attendees for participating in today's webinar. Just a real quick reminder, please take our brief survey, which will launch immediately after the session has ended. Reach out to us again if you have any questions or want to request a demo, and have a great day. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Matt. Bye-bye.